Bonjour à toutes et à tous. Good evening and good morning to our delegates and guests from across Canada and South Korea. Welcome to the Asia Pacific Foundation of Canada's third pre-virtual mission training session on South Korea's trade laws and regulations. My name is Christine Nakamura, Vice President of the Asia Pacific Foundation of Canada's Toronto office and your host of today's event. While we are meeting today in a global digital space with participants from across Canada and South Korea, I'd like to take this opportunity to acknowledge that the places Canadians call home are the traditional territories of many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. Before we begin, I would like to remind participants of a few housekeeping matters, which are posted on the Q&A box to the side of the screen. The webinar is being recorded, and mission delegates are to use the chat line located at the bottom of the screen to submit questions for the Q&A session after the presentations. Non-delegates and guests are also welcome to ask questions in the Q&A box located at the top right-hand corner of your screen. Feel free to contact us offline should we run out of time and your questions are not answered. Should you wish to access the session in French, please dial into the teleconference number identified in the Q&A box. For technical support during the session, contact events@asiapacific.ca. We have scheduled an hour and a half for today's session, the third and final training session open to the public. The fourth session will be dedicated to our 26 delegates. Feedback on our first two training sessions has been very favorable, and today's session, which is a bit more technical in nature, focuses on trade laws and regulations to help delegates better understand how to export their products and services to South Korea. As you know, Canada has a bilateral FTA or free trade agreement with South Korea, the only one with an Asian economy. And so the presenters will also touch on key aspects of the agreement, including preferential access accorded Canadian entrepreneurs in the sectors represented by our delegates and the dispute resolution mechanisms. We will also screen a video presentation or a PowerPoint presentation from one of our contractors on the ground in Seoul, Synex Consulting Limited, which will address issues specific to the healthcare sector. We have a number of speakers lined up for you tonight, but as you will have received their bios, I will keep my introductions very brief. It now gives me great pleasure to call upon Ms. Constance Sugiyama, a corporate director and advisor who is a recipient of the Order of Canada and a member of the Asia Pacific Foundation of Canada's board, to make opening remarks. Constance has had a distinguished career in law, specializing in corporate finance and mergers and acquisitions. I was also delighted to learn that she had connections to South Korea, as she has represented some of Korea's largest financial institutions. In addition to our foundation board, she currently serves on the boards of the Ontario Financing Authority, the Mount Pleasant Group, the Canadian Foundation for Healthcare Improvement, and the Gairdner Foundation. She was also formerly chair of the Board of Trustees of the Hospital for Sick Children in Toronto. Constance, over to you.
Thank you, Christine. And welcome, everybody. I am absolutely delighted as the director of the Asia Pacific Foundation of Canada to provide a few brief introductory remarks for this really fundamentally important mission to South Korea. It's a virtual mission right now. Hopefully it will become a real in-person mission at some point. This is actually my second tour of duty on the Asia Pacific Foundation board. And when I was asked if I would serve again, and it's probably 2 decades since my first term, I thought about it and I realized that now more than ever, it's a fundamentally important time for Canada to build its ties to the Asia Pacific region. And South Korea is one of the most dynamic parts of that region. It was my privilege, as Christine mentioned, I'm a lawyer. I spent 35 years on Bay Street in leadership with some very large firms. And one of the greatest privileges I had was to represent major financial institutions. And one of them invited me to go to Korea in the mid-90s to a guest observer course that they had run since the end of the Korean War. The purpose of this course was to develop friends among bankers around the world. And I was the first lawyer who had ever been invited to this session. And it changed the way I thought about South Korea. And it was a 2-week intensive program. It was an introduction to Korean history, the language, the culture, business, finance, banks. We were taken to Korean industries. And I got to see firsthand what an incredible economy and what incredible people South Korea had built. I mean, it was unbelievable. And looking at my first trip there to where we are now is quite phenomenal. At the time I went the first time, the Korean electronics, consumer electronics industry was still viewed with some skepticism in North America, much the way the Japanese consumer electronics industry was viewed after the Second World War. LG, Lucky Gold Star, Samsung was building, and we were taken to Samsung, and it was eye-opening. And I actually went to the Ontario government when I came back to implore them to develop ties with the research and development arms of some of the Korean companies. So you look at where we were then and where we are now. I'm speaking to you on my Samsung smartphone. My smart television is a Samsung TV. I mean, the South Korea has completely blown away the Japanese consumer electronics companies. So in a very short period of time. So I'm telling you this because it's really important, not just for South Korea, but for Canada, to develop the ties that we have and develop friendships. And I think the friendships have to come fundamentally first, and the business will follow. This is a long-term approach that we have to take to building our relationships. I think it's really important that this is a women-only trade mission, because for 2 reasons. One, I think it gives a boost to the women in business in Korea to see a delegation of strong participants, entrepreneurs, small and medium-sized businesses from Canada. I think the research that the Asia Pacific done has shown that Canadians are often misperceived in Asia. We're not as well known as we should be, and that's something that you can help fix. And being women, I think there are tremendous opportunities there. And to, again, build our ties. I'm going to stick around for the question and answer period, and I'd be delighted to talk to any of you now or after the session if you have questions about what it's like to do business over there and what it's like to do business over there as a woman. But I think with that, I'm going to sign off. I should say I am not. You're going to hear from the trade specialist. I do have some knowledge of the healthcare industry in this country, and I understand that a large number of the participants are health tech entrepreneurs and otherwise in business. So anyhow, as I said, I'm delighted to be part of this. I'm delighted that you are participating, and I wish you luck, and I hope that you will get over in person to see what South Korea is building.
Thank you very much, Constance, for your words of introduction and about your past. Now, we're going to focus on our first presenter, who is Trevor Fairley, a lawyer currently working on contract with us, specifically for our Women's Business Mission project. And he's going to provide an overview of South Korea's trade laws and regulations. Trevor, over to you.
Thank you very much, Christine. Thank you, Constance. I'll just one moment while I share my screen. Okay, Can everyone see my slides? Perfect, great. So thank you, Christine. Thank you, Connie. Hello, everyone. Bonjour tout le monde. Annyeonghaseyo yorobun. Good evening and good morning to those viewing from South Korea. I'm absolutely delighted to be here to talk to you today about international trade law and regulation, and delighted to be playing even a small role in such a fascinating and exciting trade mission, the first virtual women-only trade mission, and to such an important market as well. Okay. So my name is Trevor Fairley. As Christine mentioned, I'm a lawyer called to the bar in Ontario. I've been contracted by APF Canada to consult on international trade law and business regulation in South Korea. I have a bit of a history with the foundation. I've been with them for on and off for over 5 years, working on trade and investment policy for multiple provincial governments and private companies. So just a disclaimer before I begin, the content of this presentation, written and verbal, is general legal information only and not legal advice. Please do seek legal counsel if you have specific legal questions either now or, of course, in the future. So for delegates, you will have received the first half of the presentation in your pre-read materials that AW sent out yesterday. So for the purposes of time, I'm not going to go through all of the aspects of international trade law between Canada and Korea, but I will touch on some key issues that I think are going to be of importance to you as you export. So first of all, some key takeaways. If you have a legal or regulatory issue, please do seek legal advice. And this is important with expertise in the right jurisdiction. So whether that be Korea, Canada, or both. And even if you think you trust your business partners, please do get a lawyer to review your contracts. So we have a saying, which is, you can get your lawyer involved at the beginning, or you can get them involved at the end, but it's going to cost you 10 times as much to get them involved at the end. So we do encourage you, it's a best practice to get your lawyers to review all your contracts, make sure that they protect your interests in any business partnerships. And also take advantage of non-legal supports on the ground, from customs brokers to various agents and advisors. So how should you think about trade law as you begin to export? First of all, think of it in terms of the type of product. Are you exporting or importing a good or service? And then the movement of that product. Are you bringing it into Canada? Are you taking it out of Canada into Korea? And then other considerations. Are you investing? Are you going through a government procurement process, and others? So you're very fortunate, of course, to be doing business, or to begin doing business in a market that Canada has a bilateral free trade agreement with. In fact, the only bilateral FTA between Canada and an Asian country. It was signed in September 2014, entered into force about half decade ago, January 2015. Currently, about 95% of goods have a 0% tariff because of the free trade agreement. And by full implementation in 2023, 99% of goods will have 0% tariffs, and all non-agricultural goods will have 0% tariffs. So what are the benefits to you as a business of the free trade agreement? First of all, you get preferential access to the Korean market. That means you get better treatment in terms of investments and services and goods, lower to zero tariffs, etc. You also get clear and modern rules. That means you know the rules of the game. You're able to understand what your rights are and how to protect your interests. And also those rules are modern. Because it's such a new FTA, they've been able to include clauses on e-commerce and other sort of modern issues, including labor and environment, that older FTAs might not have had because of the different times. Also, in the event, which we hope doesn't happen, but in the event that something does go wrong, there are clear and fair dispute resolution mechanisms within the FTA, and then also guarantees that domestic dispute resolution mechanisms are fair and transparent, and that you as a foreign company are treated fairly in Korea. So as I mentioned, the first half of the presentation is going to be in the pre-read. So if it seems like I'm sort of jumping into a topic suddenly, that's the reason. So first, we're going to talk about intellectual property rights, or IP. I know that this is a major concern for lots of SMEs doing business abroad. Fortunately, Korea is a very mature market in terms of intellectual property rights. And so you have, in effect, very little to worry about, especially when you compare them to other markets in the region, but nonetheless, you still want to make sure that you're protecting yourself. So just a brief introduction on sort of the types of intellectual property rights that you have. So there's copyright, patents, designs, and trademarks. I think patents are probably of the most interest to you as entrepreneurs. They cover sort of commercial inventions, a new drug, a new medical device, etc. So what you need to know is that some IP, some intellectual property, is registered and some is unregistered. So registered intellectual property rights, you actually need to register them in a certain jurisdiction in order to protect them in that jurisdiction. IP rights are territorial. What that means is that if you register your patent in Canada, it does not protect it in Korea. You have to register in Korea as well. And that goes for any other market that you eventually want to be exporting in. Some intellectual property rights are unregistered, which means they're automatically protected. So for example, copyright. If you write a book, for example, the copyright is automatic. Trade secrets and trademarks in some common law jurisdictions also receive automatic protection. However, it's a best practice to, even though it's automatically protected, register them anyways. This provides you an extra layer of protection in the event of a dispute. In the event that someone says, you know, that's my IP and you stole it, you can say, well, actually, it's been certified that I created this by the Canada Intellectual Property Office or the Korea Intellectual Property Office, wherever you do end up registering it. So why should you register your IP in Korea? I've kind of touched on this a little bit, but it gives you market exclusivity. That means only you have the right to use that intellectual property in the Korean market. It also strengthens your reputation because it proves that you are the inventor of this product with the sole right to use it. And it makes you a more attractive investment and business partner. So if I'm a Korean investor or a Korean business and I'm looking to partner with you, it's a business risk if your key asset, your intellectual property, isn't actually protected as fully yours and can be taken from you by another business. So it does make you a more attractive investment partner if you have that protection, that legal guarantee from the Korean government or whatever market you're in. Also, it protects you in legal disputes. As I mentioned before, if someone comes after you and says, that's my IP, you'll be able to say, actually, no, I have the official documentation from the Korean government to say that this is indeed mine. So Korea signed up to the key legal conventions and protocols in intellectual property. So these all provide different types of protection depending on the IP that they cover for your business in Korea. And then also the Canada-Korea Free Trade Agreement also provides you with protections building on the protections of the other international conventions. These conventions in some cases also allow for a more efficient filing system. So you'll see, for example, with the Patent Cooperation Treaty, it allows you to get a bundle of patents in several jurisdictions through a single joint filing. So instead of going country by country, you're actually able to file for multiple countries in one language with one application, one currency, and one filing fee. So where do you register? If you want to do a bundle, as I just mentioned, you would go to the World Intellectual Property Organization, and I would suggest getting an agent or advisor to assist you with this. If you're only really interested in the Korean market for now, you can apply to the Korean Intellectual Property Office, KIPO. So as I mentioned, patents probably the most important IP for you as entrepreneurs and as exporters. So I have highlighted Korea's patent system here. Korea distinguishes between invention patents and utility model patents. You can think of utility model patents as essentially minor inventions, or they're just smaller. It's not an entirely new device, for example. Invention patents are protected for 20 years, utility models for 10, and you can apply to renew those. And Korea uses, and this is important, a first to file system for their patents. So what that means is it's not first to invent. Some countries use a first to invent system. It's the first to file. So if Christine and I both invent this pen, but she at the same time, or I even invent it 5 days before her, but she files before me, she gets the patent, assuming of course that her patent application is all valid. So it's not about who invents it first. And if you don't have a residence or a place of business in Korea, just know that you do need a Korean patent administrator to help you with this process according to Korean domestic law. So what are some key risks? As I mentioned before, Korea is not a market of concern, in particular for intellectual property right violations. I did talk to the Canada Intellectual Property Office in preparation for this presentation, and they couldn't name a single case where an SME came to them with a concern of IP in Korea, so that's very good. But of course, you always want to stay vigilant. So some key risks include online piracy. It's a risk in every connected nation, but of course, you'll remember from previous training sessions, Korea is a very connected nation to the internet, and that has a lot of good aspects to business, including a robust e-commerce network. But it also raises the risks of online piracy of your patented goods. Also, trademark infringement related to different uses of Hangul. So Hangul is the Korean alphabet, and sometimes some symbols or some letters look or sound quite similar but are different. So for example, I've given these two examples here in Korean of Pepsi and Pepsi. Now they are technically different pronunciations very slightly, but in theory, you could see how someone could rip off a brand and say, and trick some consumers into thinking the second one is the real Pepsi. And another key risk is business partners and employees / contractors. So you want to make sure that you're protecting your IP with them. So what are some best practices for protecting IP? You should conduct an IP audit, an intellectual property audit, and ensure that you know what IP your company has. In the pre-read materials or the materials and resources that I sent around, there is a checklist for an IP audit, so you can go through that. And I would encourage you, if you think it's important, to consult a lawyer as well if you need assistance with that. I would say register your IP in Korea as soon as possible. So you should be aware of something called the priority period. Essentially, the priority period is once you file in Canada for example, for a patent, you have 12 months to file in Korea within something called the priority period. If you file in those 12 months, your date of filing in Korea is not the actual date that you filed it in Korea, it's the date you filed it in Canada. And so that matters because in a first to file system, which Korea is, you get sort of a head start because you get that actual original Canadian filing date, not the Korean date. If you're out of this priority period, the 12 months, no worries, you just apply anyway, but you are then sort of subject to the first to file considerations where another business could file before you. Another best practice is to protect before you partner and to conduct due diligence on your business partners in Korea. Consider such agreements as non-disclosure agreements and clauses including IP protection and non-compete clauses in these partnership agreements, as well as your employment contracts. Of course, get a lawyer to help you draft those clauses to make sure that your interests are well defended. Also, another best practice is to ensure that you are not violating others' rights and exposing yourself to litigation. You want to make sure that you're conducting yourself with best practices. And also, I would say monitor the market to make sure that you're keeping an eye out for any infringements. So within your partnership agreements, clearly define who owns what intellectual property. So if you're co-designing a product with a Korean business partner, just make sure the agreement is clear on who owns what IP that comes out of that. Also, as I mentioned, non-disclosure and non-compete clauses. Also include dispute resolution mechanisms and make sure you override IP exhaustion. IP exhaustion is essentially once you sell your IP in the market, you don't control it anymore. You just want to make sure that the contract says that you still have control over that IP even once you sell it. Okay, let's turn to domestic business law and regulations in Korea. I've touched on, there's a whole lot in this sort of bucket of law and regulation that I sent along in the pre-read materials, but I'm just going to touch on a couple core topics. First of all, method of market entry. There are three main ways to enter the Korean market. You can establish a local corporation, establish a local branch of your domestic Canadian company, or establish a liaison office. So there are different regulatory and legal and taxation regimes for these three different paths. So for example, you'll see if you actually form a Korean corporation as a foreigner, you are taxed on your global income. And if you have a domestic branch of your Canadian company, you're only taxed on your Korean source income. And you can see also in this chart, the governing laws and where you can go to help process these applications. Incorporating Korea as a foreigner, there's essentially the same process as you would as a Korean national. There are just a couple of extra steps, and you'll see here, for example, foreign investment notification and foreign invested company registration. I would recommend working with a lawyer on the ground in Korea to help you with this. Also, Kotra is a good resource. They're probably able to help you on some of these steps as well. Okay, if you want to establish a foreign branch of your Canadian company as opposed to an actual Korean company, you apply for branch establishment at a foreign exchange bank, register at a local court registry office, and then apply for a business registration ID at the tax office. And just note that if you're doing this, you're still required to actually have a business address in Korea, even though it's not technically a Korean company. Now, if you want a bit of a lighter footprint, you can open a liaison office. So a liaison office has no sales functions. Essentially, for example, you can do market research or product development or R&D, research and development, but you're not to sell products out of this office. Because of the lighter footprint, it has less regulatory burden, so there's no registration required, but you do receive a local tax ID number. Okay, turning to the next topic, buying real estate. Korea does not restrict generally foreigners from buying real estate. There are some key regulations you need to be aware of though. If you're buying as an individual, so if I'm buying as Trevor Fairley, I have to file a real estate acquisition notification. If I'm buying as a company, so if I'm buying as Trevor Fairley Incorporated, I have to do a foreign investment notification. And if I'm just getting certain property rights, but not actually buying the property myself, so for example, a lease or an easement, I have to do a property acquisition notification. So where do we do these? If you're buying as an individual, you would apply to the Ministry of Land, Infrastructure and Transport within 60 days of purchase. If you are applying as a corporation, you would go to the Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy prior to bringing in the investment funds. And if you're just acquiring some property interests, you would go to the Ministry of Economy and Finance when you withdraw real estate acquisition funds. And once again, I would recommend you get a lawyer to assist you with all of these steps. And of course, there are taxes when you buy real estate. Acquisition, property, and comprehensive real estate taxes are all applied. Next topic, we'll go quickly on packaging and labeling. So you must have a Korean language label for products sold in Korea. Secondary English labeling is permitted. And of course, you need a made in Canada mark of origin, if indeed you did make your product in Canada. These are some of the key labeling requirements. Nothing really here of great surprise. Product name, price, precaution notice, size or volume, nothing really that would jump out as particularly burdensome. And of course, there are specific regulations around specific products and industries, food, cosmetics, etc. And then there's something to be aware of called the KC mark, which is just a standard label that many products have. So just if you see that, just know that that's something that's increasingly becoming common. Okay, the next topic we will talk about is dispute resolution. So obviously we all hope there are no disputes, but if there are any disputes, we want to know what we need to do in order to protect our interests as foreign companies and business people in Korea. So if your dispute is with a private party, so you and a business partner have a dispute over the contract that you've signed, for example, here are some best practices. So you want to protect yourself at the beginning of any international business relationship. Have a lawyer review your contracts for key clauses, including but not limited to dispute resolution clauses and governing law clauses. So dispute resolution clauses meaning, if something goes wrong, this is the process we're going to follow, and the governing law meaning it will be governed by Canadian law or Korean law or another law, for example, just to provide clarity in the event of a dispute. Also insert a notice clause in your agreements to be notified of any litigation disputes from your partners claiming a certain amount, how they'll tell you, what records they need to provide, etc. To protect yourself, also, I would say conduct yourself in good faith and employ best practices to avoid legal action from your partners, and be vigilant for potential violations by your partners or others of your rights, whether they be contractual or under Korean law or under trade law. If you do find yourself in a dispute, please do consider alternative dispute resolution. So alternative dispute resolution, we've probably heard of these terms: arbitration, mediation, negotiation. Why is it considered a best practice to pursue alternative dispute resolution? The reason is that litigation in court is expensive, very time consuming, damaging to business relationships because it's highly adversarial, uncertain in its result, and publicly disclosed. Alternative dispute resolution, by contrast, is much quicker. It'll save you time and money. It'll preserve your business relationships because it's more collaborative, and it protects confidentiality because it's a confidential process as opposed to sort of an open court dispute. And it avoids an uneven playing field so that you don't actually find yourself in a Korean court against a Korean company before a Korean judge, and sort of out of home turf, if you will. Arbitration, probably the most common alternative dispute resolution in international commerce. Businesses tend to like it because they get to design their own process within certain limits. They get to agree, for example, on an arbitrator, the jurisdiction, how the costs will be apportioned, what procedural rules will be applied, and the location of the actual arbitration setting. And you can also select an arbitrator if they're available based on expertise. So for example, you can get an arbitrator who's an expert in biotech or some other industry to really understand your dispute and hopefully come to a higher quality resolution. And make sure you have a clear and strong arbitration clause in your contract so that you're covering all these issues nicely and not leaving any surprises or anything to fight about on the process front when the arbitration actually begins. Now, what if your dispute is not with a business partner, but actually with a Korean government agency? So for example, if you applied for a license to some agency run by the Korean government and they rejected your application for that license and you think, I actually think I had a great case and I think that was wrongly decided, where would you go? Well, first of all, I would say definitely consult with a lawyer, but one place you could go is the Foreign Investment Ombudsperson. They help you settle grievances with a government agency. And if they agree with your case, they'll order corrective measures. So in my example, they would order that license be granted to you. They also provide a regulatory information service for foreign investors, which you could find useful. But please note, they do not, as I mentioned, handle private disputes. That is between you and your business partner. Okay, and that's all for today. I would refer you to the materials I sent around for the other topics that I've prepared, and I'm happy to answer questions in the panel later. Thank you. Merci. 감사합니다.
Thank you very much, Trevor, for that very technical but comprehensive presentation on trade law and regulations. I'm sure you're going to get tons of questions afterwards, so be prepared. Anyway, next, I'd like to call upon the founder and CEO, Ms. Yong Kim, and Managing Director, Rachel Chung of Sinex Consulting Limited, which is a consulting firm situated in Seoul, and they will provide a PowerPoint presentation focused on the healthcare sector, primarily because our delegation has quite a few representatives in that space. Both Young and Rachel will participate in a live Q&A session following the presentation. So over to you, Young and Rachel.
Yeah, thank you very much for the introduction, Christine. Yeah, do you hear me okay?
Yes, we do.
So yeah, good morning, Korea, and good evening, Canada. My name is Young Kim, and the CEO of Sinex Consulting based in Korea. This is my colleague, Rachel, for a medical device regulatory and market access expert.
Hello, everybody. I'm Rachel. So I'm in charge for the medical device group in Sinex, as well as the manufacturing caring for pharmaceutical and medical device.
Yeah, we are very delighted to be part of this historic program. We are going to share with you general business environment in healthcare industry in Korea. In order to the best use of our time, and also in order to avoid any problem in internet connections, we pre-recorded a 15-minute presentation with a general overview of the business environment in healthcare with focus on the medical device industry. So we are going to run it soon, and then we are going to use the remaining time for questions and answers you might have.
아니, 이걸로 했는데. 아까 됐는데. 이거 맞죠? 4KX1 맞아, 이거 맞아요.
During the test, it certainly worked. So the audio, I guess, is the problem.
왜 안 되는지 모르겠네요. 아까는 다 됐는데.
Young, oh, oh. Is the audio working?
Hello, my name is Young Kim, President of Sinex Consulting in Seoul, Korea. It's a great honor for me to speak at the pre-mission training of Canada's first woman-only virtual business mission to South Korea. I'd like to thank Christine Nakamura and Asia Pacific Foundation of Canada for giving me this great opportunity to share information with you on healthcare market in Korea. First of all, on behalf of all of my colleagues at Sinex, I welcome Canadian women entrepreneurs participating in this historic mission. Sinex is also a woman enterprise with a woman CEO and board of directors, and 80% of our employees women. So being with you today has a special meaning to me. I think Sinex is a good example of a successful business led by women. So I look forward to hearing from you on other success stories in the near future. Sinex is a solution shop for healthcare market access in Korea. With 110 employees, we offer medical device and pharmaceutical companies with the consulting services for regulatory and reimbursement approvals, clinical research and partnership setup for distribution in Korea. In my hope to help you accomplish your business objectives through this trade mission, I'd like to share with you a general overview over the next 20 minutes. For those of you who may not be in healthcare businesses, I hope my presentation will help you navigate in Korean market in whatever way. Let me start with a quick summary of Korea as a healthcare market. Korea is located in the East Asia between Japan and China. Population is 51 million, about 37% larger than Canada. Its land space is very limited, about 1% of that of Canada. So we are densely populated in large cities such as Seoul. In terms of economy, Korea is a relatively wealthy country with around 32,000 US dollars of GDP per capita, which is about 30% less than that of Canada. In terms of amount of money people use for healthcare, Korean people spend average 3,000 US dollars a year. This amount is much less than people in Canada, spending about 5,200 US dollars a year. This means that Korea has large room for further growth in healthcare market. In this slide, you can see with red arrows a few large cities where majority of health business revenues are coming from. By entering into large university hospitals in those cities, you can access major market for your products very efficiently. Let's take a look at the pharmaceutical market. Korea is the 12th largest pharmaceutical market in the world. The size was estimated at 23.1 billion US dollars in 2018. In 2018, about 600 manufacturers were participating in the pharmaceutical market. Also, more than 26,000 wholesalers or retailers also did their business for the same year. In terms of medical device market, Korea was the 9th largest market in the world with 7.8 billion US dollar as supply value. This size is similar to the device market in Canada. Imported medical device share around 62% of the market and has a strong position as a premium quality of products, especially when imported from North America. In medical device industry, we have about 3,500 manufacturers and 2,500 importers. These companies are your potential business partners if you are in medical device business. In general, doctors and patients in Korea are highly receptive to new healthcare technologies and very much interested in trying new products in early stage of introduction in the market. Doctors are most influential in decision-making process of medical device purchasing, so it's very important for you to understand how to address doctors' unmet needs. Let's move on to see how the regulatory system look like for medical devices in Korea. Health Authority of Korea is Ministry of Food and Drug Safety. MFDS is the Korean equivalent to Health Canada. The agency regulates drugs, medical devices, cosmetics, and food products. Its office located in the city of Osong. You can go there in 40 minutes by high-speed train from Seoul. Medical devices are regulated under Medical Device Act. Regulations are announced in a few different levels of legal authorities. Requirements for regulatory submission are provided mostly in MFDS ministerial notifications. Drugs are regulated under Pharmaceutical Affairs Act. For medical device review, MFDS has 6 different offices for different device categories. Please note Digital Health Division in the pink box of the bottom of slide. This is a new office MFDS set up in May earlier this year. About a month ago, MFDS opened additional 2 new offices you see in the red boxes in the middle of the slide, one for pre-submission consultation and another one for expedited review for medical device and pharmaceuticals. MFDS made these offices for faster approval of new technologies of special value to patients. Like most other countries, Korea also regulates medical devices based on class. We have 4-class system similar to Canada. Regulatory pathways are different depending on class and previous approvals of similar devices. We recommend you plan from a few months to about a year to complete the approval process for class 2 to 4 devices. I'd like to make a few important points you need to know for approvers of pharmaceuticals and medical devices in Korea. The first of all, you need to partner with a Korean legal entity in order to make application to MFDS. The agency issues a product import approval to a legal entity registered in Korea only. So you need to work with a Korean company who will be holding your product licenses. MFDS may approve your medical device product even before you have approval in the country of origin. So you can start processes for the Korean approval anytime if you can meet with the MFDS requirements regardless of status approval in Canada or elsewhere in the world. MFDS also accepts foreign test reports, so you don't need to repeat the same testing in Korea if your test reports meet with MFDS requirements. For medical device approval in Korea, local clinical trials are not necessary if your original clinical study reports meet with MFDS review criteria. Certainly, if you can generate clinical data from Korean people, that will be very helpful for you to have MFDS approval quickly. Let's move on to the payment system in Korea. Let me brief you of the public health insurance system in the country because reimbursement is the most important factor for healthcare business in Korea. We have a public health insurance program called the National Health Insurance, NHI. It is a sole national health insurance and covers the entire population. All healthcare service organizations are paid by NHI. The program offers free access to any healthcare organization located in any part of the country, so it's a very convenient program. We also have a supplementary private insurance programs available. These programs are offered to cover certain percentage of patient co-payment. You can find out NHI reimbursement status of services, devices, or drug through electronic reimbursement price list. Ministry of Health and Welfare announces new approval almost every month in its electronic announcement system. Processes for NHI reimbursement approval applications are well established. Approval process for new services, drugs, or devices are offered in different tracks with different review turnaround times. So far, we have gone through regulatory and reimbursement system for healthcare businesses in Korea. From now on, let me step back and tell you a little bit of social perspectives of what healthcare industry means to the big picture of Korean economy. Healthcare industries have attracted strong policy support since 2017 when President Moon Jae-in was elected. The Moon administration sets the goal of developing healthcare innovation as the litmus paper of success in the fourth industrial revolution of Korea. Ministry of Food and Drug Safety is changing its regulatory framework for breakthrough medical technologies, digital health, IVD, and combination products to facilitate market access of innovative products. Ministry of Health and Welfare is renovating its reimbursement coverage decision processes, so breakthrough medical technologies are phased into the public coverage program more smoothly. COVID-19 is providing Korea with the momentum to accelerate artificial intelligence and digital health innovation. Korean government set up Digital New Deal policy to invest $2.2 billion to set up digital health platform in 2020. Additional funds will be coming in the future in annual budgets. Korean government also developed national AI strategy to bolster the development of AI domestically. The strategy sets the goal of becoming the world's third most competitive digital economy by 2030. Venture capitals also came in to invest significant amount of capitals to support advance with the healthcare technology innovation. Investment to healthcare R&D accounted the largest portion of all venture capital investment for the past 5 years. Before I finish my presentation, I'd like to make a summary of take-home messages for you to keep in mind in your downroad to Korea. Good news is Korea is a top-notch technology country in the world and Asia. Healthcare innovation is one of the national growth strategies. Funds for technology innovation are plentiful. The earliest technology adopting population is more than ready to spend their money for a better quality of life. Government is ready to support better healthcare technology innovation for earlier patient access. Regulatory system for medical product approval is transparent and well harmonized with the international practices. Public healthcare insurance program benefits the entire population and ready to cover more cost-effective technology. As foreign businesses, you will also face with challenges. The more you go deep into the market, the more you feel that Korea has a unique problems and pain points. My advice will be, if you want to succeed in this market, immerse yourself into such a challenge and take part of it. You may feel significant barriers in language and business culture. However, I think the Korean market will be rewarding if you pursue the market with perseverance. As a rule of thumb, good partnership with in-country companies is most important. This is all I have for you today. I hope you enjoy my presentation.
Thank you very much.
Best of luck in your business journey to Korea. Let me know anytime if you feel I can be of any help to you. I look forward to meeting with you in person in Seoul. The city is full of history, technology, lots of fun, and good people. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Young and Rachel. A very comprehensive presentation, and I'm sure you will get questions as well. But before we begin the Q&A session, I just wanted to mention to the delegates that a large portion of our delegation focuses on the healthcare sector, and so this is why we had Sinex work with us today. But we have another consultant in Korea working for the other sectors of food, agri-food, and education technology. And the consultant will be reaching out to our delegates in those sectors very soon. And I think that Young and Rachel, Sinex has been in touch with a number of the healthcare sector companies that are on the mission with us. But those remaining, they'll be in touch with you very soon because they are working on the B2B matching for us for the virtual trade mission. So before we begin the discussion and Q&A, I'd like to remind delegates to post questions for the speakers on the chat line, and non-delegates are to use the Q&A box. We are monitoring both sections, and we'll do our best to respond to as many questions as possible. In addition to Connie, or Constance, Trevor, Young, and Rachel, we also have Julia Webster, an experienced corporate lawyer, associate lawyer at Borden, Ladner, and Gervais LLP in Toronto, whose practice focuses on Asia to answer questions from the audience. So I think that we will begin with a few questions that we have received already. And I'm going to put it out to certain speakers, but if others want to jump in, that's absolutely fine. So I'm going to start with Trevor. from your understanding and research, are there any regulatory barriers unique to South Korea when setting up a legal entity in market? Trevor, could you respond to that question?
Certainly, every market will have its own unique barriers to setting up a corporation. However, it is quite easy for foreign corporations in terms of the difference between setting it up as a Korean national and as a Canadian. As my slides pointed out, there are just a couple of extra steps around foreign investment notifications, and you're able to. Korea actually has a great resource, which which our delegates will recognize from prior training sessions, where they can actually assist the businesses in the setting up the corporation. And there's in the materials that we sent around, there's sort of a step-by-step guide, including all the forms that are required and all the specific registrations that are needed. So not particularly difficult, not anything I can think of or point out that's sort of unique to South Korea in that respect, but certainly it's difficult to it's takes a lot of work to set up a corporation in Canada, let alone in a country that you're not living in. So certainly I would encourage all the entrepreneurs to take advantage of the supports on the ground in Korea, including Kotra, but also their own legal counsel and business advisors as well.
Thank you for that, Trevor. We have a question from the delegates, and I'm going to take the time right now to ask all delegates to turn on their videos so that we can see you, and the speakers and panelists can see you on video, if you don't mind. So please do that. Thank you. We have a question.
It's disabled, Christine.
Oh, is it? I see a few faces. Mandy, can you?
Oh, mine's working now. Sorry.
Okay, all right. So we have a question from Dr. Allison Secular, who's from the Center for Aging and Brain Institute, Brain Care. And her question is the seniors care sector as open to innovation as hospitals? And what are the barriers in working with long-term care homes and other seniors focused organizations? I think that's a question for Yong Kim or Rachel Chung.
Well, it depends on the business classification of the senior the care home. If the organization is classified as a healthcare provider or is like a hospital, you need to go through the certain process to meet with the requirements as a healthcare service organization in Korea. Basically, the healthcare service organization is considered as a non-profit organization. So it's quite different from what you see in the Canada as a for-profit organization. So I like to suggest you check with the local regulation for the requirements of a non-profit organization, the management in Korea.
Okay, thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Constance, here's some questions for you. Are you aware of any investments by Korean financial institutions in Canadian tech sector scale-ups here in Canada? I know it's been a while since you worked with the Korean financial institutions, but just a question if you're aware of any activity there.
Yeah, no, I'm probably not current on this at all. So I'm trying to think of a source that might be, but I don't know whether the other speakers are aware of any new developments.
I wonder if Yong Kim or Rachel would know of any investments into the healthcare sector in Canada, healthcare tech sectors.
Well, I'm not aware of such company or organization.
Okay, then I'm going to ask you, Yong, if you're aware you know, the Canada-Korea Free Trade Agreement came into force in 2015. And I'm wondering if you're aware of any Canadian companies in the healthcare space that are that have entered the Korean market and are doing reasonably well.
Well, I see some the medical device suppliers, from Canada, but to my regret, Canada is not one of the large exporting country for medical devices. So I hope this opportunity they open the future for more trade volume in medical device and healthcare industries.
We hope so too, because we do have a very good sector being, you know, developing in Canada. So this is partly why we're focusing a lot on healthcare. So I'm going to go back to Trevor, or maybe this is a question for Julia. In your practice at BLG, has the Canada-Korea Free Trade Agreement been helpful in facilitating new entry of Canadian companies into the Korean market? Would you be able to address that?
Sure, absolutely. So first of all, I just want to say thank you so much for having me here tonight. It's really a pleasure to be in the room with so many innovative women entrepreneurs from Canada who are interested in expanding their brands or their products and that footprint outside Canada. So has the CKFTA been successful? In my practice, I haven't worked with any direct Canadian companies that have used it to have their goods enter the Korean market duty-free, but I can tell you generally from my experience with FTAs, there are a lot of companies that are taking advantage of them. The biggest barrier to getting your product into a new market from a price perspective and a competitive perspective is really surtaxes and tariffs that are applied to those goods. And something that the Canada-Korea Free Trade Agreement does so successfully is really reducing those tariff barriers to trade and even some technical barriers to trade. There are a lot of excellent guarantees, especially when you start looking into the e-commerce provisions and the digital tax provisions about not allowing either Canada or South Korea to kind of create what we refer to in the industry as technical barriers to trade. So apart from tariffs, other regulatory issues or customs issues about getting your goods into South Korea. So I know that that's a very broad statement, but it is one of the more modern FTAs that Canada has entered into, and that's why you do have a lot of those digital protections that are there.
So Julia, I'm going to ask you a question on that CKFTA. Are there provisions on the gender issues addressed in that agreement?
So that's a great question. This idea of trade and gender is something that was really a part of the Liberal Party of Canada's administration, and the CKFTA was negotiated during the Harper administration, and trade and gender wasn't as much as a focus then. So from what I recall, and I'll pull up the agreement quickly on my screen, I don't think that there are any specific trade and gender provisions under the CKFTA. But under the newly negotiated USMCA, there are provisions on trade and gender, and I recall as well the Comprehensive and Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership, the CPTPP, may also have some trade and gender provisions. What is interesting is in a lot of the FTAs that Canada has entered into, there's often chapters dedicated to issues because the government at the time who's negotiating the FTA has a certain view towards what's important and what's important to to the future of Canada. And lately we've been seeing trade and gender, obviously environmental provisions as well. Canada has been slowly opening up markets which were traditionally quite protected. So you see things like dairy as well.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Thank you very much. Trevor, we have another question for you here. What happens if a patent application gets rejected by the Korean Intellectual Property Office?
So
What
if,
recourse
yep,
are there?
if you apply for a patent, you don't get it, or you get a patent issued that you shouldn't have gotten issued. There's actually an internal process within the Korean Intellectual Property Office, and so this process is guaranteed by the FTA as well to be fair and transparent to you. And what you can do is then appeal that decision. So you would receive a decision from the patent officer. You would appeal that decision to the Intellectual Property Trade and Appeal Board, which is this sort of internal appeal mechanism within the Korean Intellectual Property Office. And there you'll have a hearing in front of a panel of adjudicators. I believe it's 3 adjudicators who will determine whether the decision of the officer was made correctly or incorrectly. And then if you don't get the result that you're looking for there, and you think you still have a case, there are appeal routes domestically. There's a patent court, and then you can go in theory all the way up to the Supreme Court, with, of course, legal representation in the market. So there is a route if it gets rejected. It's not sort of the end of the road. But if in the rare circumstance that there are sort of 2 businesses fighting for 1 patent, time is of the essence, and you want to make sure that you understand sort of what you need to do right away so that you're able to fully exercise your rights under Korean domestic law, but then also under the FTA.
Okay, very good. Young, in terms of, yes, sorry, Connie?
I just wondered if we could go back for a minute to the question about investment. I focused too narrowly on and answered too quickly, because it was, are there financial institutions that are investing? I would not be surprised if there were not private equity investors from South Korea that have invested in funds here that are being managed in Canada and the extent to which they are in turn investing in earlier stage medical device technologies or health technologies is something that I could clearly inquire about, because I'm advising a number of these sort of funds. So I could ask, if whoever asked the question, we'll just leave your contacts with Christine. I'll come back to you on that.
That'd be very good, Constance. That would be very helpful. So I have a question here, I guess just popped in for Julia. What are some legal considerations when exporting goods to South Korea?
Sure. So that's a relevant question for our audience tonight. And when you're thinking about exporting your products, so I'm a Canadian lawyer, so I can give you kind of a bird's eye view of the Canadian requirements for exporting your products. You need to consider the legal side of export and also the administrative side. So you may have a legal question where you'd want to be seeking advice from a lawyer, someone like me, or another of other reputable trade lawyers in Canada, or you may have a specific kind of customs administration question, which could be answered by a customs broker. So from a customs perspective, you need to consider having and applying for a business number for an export account, which can easily be acquired by the CRA. That's a very basic first step to being able to export your goods. And as well, you need to ask yourself some questions to ensure that your goods are eligible to be exported from Canada. So some questions that you may want to consider are, is my product a controlled good? Is it subject to export controls? So very briefly, what's an export control? Well, it's exactly as it's named. It is a Canadian law that's in place to regulate or control the export of certain products in Canada. And Canada maintains an export control list of all of the products that are controlled, which includes products all the way from military technology to dairy products. And sometimes export controls are only in place against products that have certain countries of origins or destinations as to where they're being exported to. So that's something else that you may need to consider. And I'll just flag for our listeners tonight that if a product contains some US origin goods, let's say that you're manufacturing a technology product that includes perhaps some US parts of that product, there is probably going to be an export permit requirement because the US government imposes what are called retransfer conditions on certain US origin goods and technology, even after they've been exported from the United States. So that's a legal point that you may want to consider. And as well, you want to look into what is the country of origin of your product. As I understand from looking at a lot of the products and services that the delegates here are offering tonight, it seems that they are made in Canada, but it could be the case that your goods may not meet the origin requirements under the Canada-Korea Free Trade Agreement to have that preferential tariff treatment applicable to them. So it's important that you consider, what is the country of origin of our product? Where is it manufactured? Where are the parts that it's manufactured from? Where do they originate from? Because as an exporter, you will be responsible for completing something called a certificate of origin, which is a signed declaration from the manufacturer of goods for export that the goods are of Canadian origin and meet the requirements of the Canada-Korea Free Trade Agreement. So if you are exporting your goods to a distributor or a customer in South Korea, you would be responsible for supplying them with that certificate, which that they could then provide to Korean customs to be able to claim preferential tariff treatment under the CK FTA. And then there are also, from an administrative side, a lot of things like export declarations, which a customs broker would be able to assist you with.
Very comprehensive. Thank you for that response. I have a question here from Elizabeth Duville. And TVM, I understand, is a German VC fund. Her question is, TVM Capital got a management contract with a Korean partner to manage their money and invest in biotech as part of the TVM fund. TVM is based in Germany, but also had an office in Montreal. So could anybody speak to that Korean partnership? Would you know anything about that, Young Kim, or no?
I have no idea about that. I'm sorry.
All right. Elizabeth, did you want to add to that question? Generically?
Yeah, no, thanks, Christine. It wasn't so much a question as because I think it had been raised about past relationships between Korean partners and Canada. And at least that was one that I could think about where TVM Capital, which is a fairly sizable venture fund based out of Germany that managed to get some money here in Canada from institutional investors, had successfully actually gotten a partnership with a Korean, and I'm blanking on what the nature of that Korean partner was, but that Korean partner was interested in accessing or investing into innovation outside of Korea or creating those partnerships. So I thought it was a pretty clever thing for them to do at the time. I don't know if that relationship still exists, but certainly that's the type of thing that we'd be looking for in Korea. To provide
That's a good
access.
segue into a question I had, because I think Young Kim mentioned in her presentation that, a good business practice is to find a partner in Korea, to work with a partner over there. And so my question is, when you partner with a Korean organization, business, or what have you, does that give the Canadian company access to, let's say, further R&D funds or monies available from the Korean government to help them, to further develop their innovation? Young Kim, could you?
The Korean government funds for R&D is offered to the Korean companies only. However, in the process of developing technologies, Korean companies needs the partnership with the foreign the technology innovators. They can arrange the funds can be used for a part of the fund can be used for their within their budgeting system. So if the Canadian companies are interested in the receiving or taking advantage of the Korean public R&D funds, they should be partnering with the Korean companies, so Korean companies can make applications to the Korean government.
That was what I was hoping to hear. That's very good. Okay. We have a question here from Ling Li Tan. Can you speak to the processes of adoption for assistive communication technologies, specifically mobile applications, not hardware devices? In Canada, they would have to be approved through the Assistive Devices Program to be subsidized through the healthcare system. So she is wondering if the process would be similar in Korea. I wonder if Yong Kim or Rachel could answer that.
Well, I like to say that first of all, the companies need to find out whether such a software or the mobile applications classified as a medical device. Because Korea, the MFDS regulations have a separate category for mobile apps or software programs regulated as a medical devices. So whether it's simply to assist the functions, or if the products is the intended to be used as a medical purposes, if the medical purposes, the software must be approved as a medical the devices according to the medical device regulation. So
Ms. Young's answer is correct. So firstly, we have to think your software, your mobile app is applicable for medical purpose or not. So just in helping our life itself, it is not easier to consider for the medical device. But anyway, the software and mobile app can be registered in Korea as a medical device if the product has the medical purpose.
yeah.
So in Korea, we also have another category is a wellness software. So this kind of product is a very human, the life type, the assistant product software. In that case, so depending on the company's intention and purpose, we can ask to MFDS it is going to the medical device or not. And depending on the discussion with the MFDS, we can process as a medical device process or just a life helping device in Korea.
So if the application is classified as a wellness device, the wellness device is just a commodity. There is no the regulation from the health authorities. So the wellness devices or programs can just follow the general software regulation is commodity.
I see. Very good. Thank you for that. Elizabeth, we just got some information in about the MOU, TVM MOU. It was with the Korea Drug Development Fund, and it was entered into, I think, agreement was back in 2013. And they went into an MOU agreement to support the pharmaceutical industry in Korea. So that was fundamentally what took place between TVM with the Korea Drug Development Fund. Okay, so we have a couple of other questions here. All right. I don't know if, Constance, you can answer this a little bit, but would you know the legal requirements for a Korean company wanting to invest in Canada? Just fundamentally, basic stuff? Or is that pretty detailed and technical?
Christina,
I just unmuted my.
Yeah.
Could you just repeat the question for me?
Yeah. Just in general terms, do you know roughly what the legal requirements are for a Canadian company or equity or what have you to invest here in Canada? Is it very complicated and detailed?
So I'm going to issue a disclaimer first that when I retired from law, I gave up my license to practice precisely so I could defer on legal questions. But any entity wanting to invest in Canada, you know, directly or indirectly, would obviously be subject to our laws, whether it's securities laws in terms of investing in a fund, or whether it's Investment Canada laws investing directly. So it's hard to answer that question without having more specific facts.
Okay. All right.
So
That's
Christine,
fine.
may I comment about the question?
Pardon me?
Yeah, Christine, I like to comment on that question.
Mm-hmm.
That if Korean companies wants to invest into the Canadian companies, in Korea we have a certain regulations. So the Korean companies must report their capital investment situation to the certain bank in Korea.
I see. Okay. All right. That's very clear. Thank you for that. Now, there was a question from one of my staff, and they were wondering, you know, the going back to the lists of approved healthcare products and medical devices that you showed in your presentation, Young. Are these publicly available in English? And maybe even in French is the question. Are they?
Yeah, in Korea, MFDS, they did not publish all regulations in Korean and in English, but some summary they are posting on their website. But it is not much full comprehensive material. But the high level regulations such as Medical Device Act, it is available full text in English in their website.
And I like to say that the MFDS is working hard to translate as many regulations as possible into English, because MFDS is going to chair the International Medical Device Regulatory Forum beginning next year. So they like to have many regulations available in English.
Very good.
It's a one of the tip. Ms. Youngi mentioned that organization name is IMDRF, and I understand Canada is one of a very powerful member for the IMDRF. So in their website, the Korea government posting our regulation explanation briefly a lot in that website. So you can also that is easier for you to see the Korean regulatory system than the MFDS website.
Okay, thank you very much for that. So I'm going to ask each of the presenters and speakers to have one word for advice in the area of your expertise for our entrepreneurs. So I'm going to start with Yong Kim and Rachel Chung. One piece of advice that you'd like to give to our entrepreneurs who are very interested in the Korean market.
Well, for the past 18 years, I have the comments as the disadvantages as a woman entrepreneurs in Korea. So I like to say that the Canadian entrepreneurs come to Korea and navigate your way freely.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And, you know, Korea right now has a president who, like our Prime Minister Trudeau, President Moon Jae-in is very pro gender equality. So I think it's very timely. We have a lot of synergies and values that are both, you know, honored in both countries. So I think it's a good timing for us. Okay, I'm going to go to Connie. Constance, can you give one piece of advice to our women before closing?
I think it would be make good friends. Good friends, good partners, and persevere, be patient.
Thank you for that. Julia?
Sure. Sure. I would say have a picture of your end goal before making small decisions that may not seem important in the grand scheme of things, but may actually have an echo later on, whether that's decisions about your supply chain or deciding on a label before you've read all of the regulations on how your product must be labeled, little things like that. So do your homework first before you make all of those small decisions, which may cost you more money in the long run if something small is done incorrectly.
Very good advice. And Trevor?
Absolutely. And building on that, I would say protect yourself at the beginning. When you're signing business contracts with partners, employment contracts with employees on the ground, make sure you, with respect to your IP, all aspects of your exporting and your business abroad, protect yourself at the beginning. Obviously, we all hope nothing goes wrong, but you want to make sure that if something does go wrong, that you have rock solid contracts and agreements that defend your interests and that provide clarity in the event of a dispute.
Wonderful. So I'd like to now thank all of our speakers and participants today, and a special thanks to our partners and sponsors, and especially the Federal Economic Development Agency for Southern Ontario, who've made this whole training series possible, and also our virtual mission. To our delegates, next week's training session is dedicated to you only. The session will teach you how to navigate the geographic information system mapping tool that we have developed in-house on South Korea. And it's specifically for the upcoming mission, as you know. The map has been upgraded, incorporating the suggestions that all of you made in our preliminary feedback session with you. So I hope you will find it useful. Before closing, I would like to remind non-delegate guests that you are welcome to attend the virtual mission, the business mission, as observers on November 3rd and 4th, 2020 at 6:30 in the evening EST as observers. The registration link will be going up tomorrow, hopefully, so please visit our website, the Asia Pacific Foundation of Canada's website, to register. We welcome all of you to take part. Again, many thanks again to everybody for joining us this evening, and we hope that you found tonight's session useful. Thank you very much, and have a pleasant evening.